With Allied victories in Italy, the tide of the war has continued to turn against the Axis powers. The time has come for the Allies to break into France and push the Germans back to their own border. The war will now move into the resort towns of southern France, the French Riviera. Ted Fleeser was with the U.S. 45th Infantry Division. This is where he would meet the enemy, on the battlefront. Since 1943, with Allied victories in Italy, German troops have been reassigned to shore up defenses in France and Germany. The D-Day landings at Normandy bring Allied armies right into France. By August 1944, 2 months after the D-Day invasion, the Allies have consolidated their forces. Now they head east to break down German defense positions. The further the Allies drive into France, the more vulnerable they become. To protect themselves, a secondary offensive is ordered, the invasion of southern France. Operation Dragoon is to land Allied troops east of Marseille and Toulon on the Mediterranean coast, and to open a new battlefront on the French Riviera. The landing beaches and their approaches are chartered to perfection, and the deployment of enemy troops is no secret. The Maquis, the French resistance forces, report every movement. 3 American and 2 French divisions are withdrawn from Italy. These will become the nucleus of the invasion force. They are rolled into the 7th Army under the leadership of Lieutenant General Alexander Patch. To minimize the continuing problem of inter-service rivalries, the entire assault command is given headquarters aboard one ship, the USS Catoctin. On board for the invasion is a veteran who has just recovered from injuries he received at Anzio, Corporal Ted Fleeser with the 1st Ranger Battalion.
After securing Rome, we prepared for southern France, since the function of the 1st Special Service Force, which was part of the 1st Allied Airborne Task Force, was to take out, prior to the main landings, a couple of islands off of Toulon. They had the coastal defense guns on these islands, which would have impeded the landing. This company was unique in the 1st Special Service Force in that it was an all-ranger company absorbed as a unit into the force. So they were all men who had been in action, at least in Sicily.
The Germans are expecting the landings in southern France. General Johannes Blockowitz stations 30,000 troops in the assault zone. They are ordered to hold the invaders for a few days until the Allies have tipped off their main landing area. Then 200,000 more German troops will move in to counterattack.
It was quite secure. They also had guns to fire out to sea, of course. Retractable cupolas for their forward observers. Their accommodations were quite luxurious.
As Wehrmacht combat troops are deployed throughout key defense sectors, various support units are alerted to move to southern France.
Well, wherever you have a mechanized army, you have to have support units to keep the tanks rolling. Military equipment takes a beating, and it takes support services, it takes technicians. The support units also experimented with weaponry, trying to figure out ways to use ordinary machines as lethal weapons, and they actually came up with a remote-controlled anti-tank device. When they were needed in the front lines, the mechanics and the engineers could be transferred into fighting units. So these units were following the panzers wherever they went. The Germans were very anxious to keep the population and the army from knowing just how precarious the situation was, so they were never told what was going on. But when they got to France and they found that things were not going well, many of these were young men who had never been out of Germany before in their lives, but many of them had fathers who had fought in World War I and been killed in World War I or earlier in World War II, and they knew all too well that the risk was that they might wind up the same way. So the morale was not as good as it would have been had the soldiers not been on the scene and seen what the Allies were throwing against them.
There is no hope of surprising the Germans, but efforts are made to keep the exact landing sector a secret. Bombers of the Mediterranean Allied Air Force hit selected stretches of coastline, but only one of them is the intended assault area. August 14th, the main convoys pass between the islands of Corsica and Sardinia. Barrage balloons protect the ships from low-flying enemy planes. But in truth, the Germans have little air power available to them from their depleted Luftwaffe. At dusk, the ships change course and head for their destination, Toulon and Cannes.